Look, that genuinely might be one of the weirdest games I've ever seen, one of the longest games of football ever, probably, because of this huge intermission in the middle of the game. The game was postponed because there was lightning, I think within a 10-mile radius. Chelsea were winning 1-0 when the game was postponed at 86 minutes. There were only 4 minutes left of the game, and the break in play was a long time. I can't remember how long it was specifically, but certainly over an hour. I want to be completely honest, during that time I did my whole match analysis and reaction, recorded it because I thought, look, 4 minutes left of the game, let me record it, let me get it ready to upload, and I'll get an early night, because surely Benfica aren't going to score in the remaining 3 or 4 minutes, given, for large parts of the game, Chelsea actually dominated the ball and Benfica were kind of protecting their own box. Knowing my luck, it just happened to be Di Maria who scored that penalty in the remaining 4 minutes of time that they did have, a couple hours after that break in play. I'm going to talk a little bit about what happened when Di Maria scored and what happened in extra time, but I've still got the bulk of footage from yesterday evening where I talked about what happened throughout the first 86 minutes. So I'm probably going to put that here, and I'll catch you again at the end of that part of the footage where I can break down what happened after that game. Let's focus on Chelsea because I paid closer tactical attention to their game, but I think Benfica's out of possession game was really important to look at as well. Chelsea, I think, will focus on their in-possession stuff, and it was interesting because Cole Palmer was playing on the left-hand side. I know Maresca's done that a few times, and to explain some of that, I might talk a little bit about angles and footedness, and I made a tweet throughout this game saying that I think Maresca is one of those coaches who actually pays really close attention to footedness and angles. Well, let's talk about generally the shape that they played. They played a sort of 3-2-5 in possession, but it was quite fluid. So let's talk about that fluid nature and where they aim to get some advantages against Benfica. So they set up in this sort of 3-2-5. Benfica set up in this 4-4-2. Di Maria was the player on the right wing in the first half, and generally, Cucurella looked to push really high, and in doing so, he often pinned Di Maria back. Di Maria almost played as this quasi-right wing-back, which is obviously not his position, especially for a player of his age in those conditions. He did a good job, actually, all things considered, playing in that zone. Later on in the second half, they moved him, put him as one of the front two players, and had someone else slot into that zone there. But you kind of had those two players playing their own little game of cat and mouse. So for argument's sake, we can say this almost set up in a 5-3-2 when pinned back. Now, we know Benfica throughout this tournament have been very strong defensively, and they aim to block the centre of the pitch. They don't want to concede goals through that area, and they funnel play out into the wings because they've got really strong box defenders. This is actually their right back. Their two centre backs are here, and then their left back was obviously on the other side against Neto. Chelsea played with a back four in general. Obviously, Cucurella pushed up in that manner, but you had your double pivot of Caicedo and Lavia here. It was these two players who are really interesting and who I want to mention. Cole Palmer obviously playing on the left, and on paper you'd think he'd probably play on the right wing, or if he is going to play in the front line, more as the left winger, and then obviously inverting when Cucurella pushed up the pitch. But it was actually Cole Palmer's positioning deeper that was really interesting. He got a lot of those touches in these areas. I've spoken before, actually, particularly in the overlap breakdown videos, where Chelsea, especially under Maresca, have opted for this sort of double width kind of principle. And I might grab my pen actually for this. In trying to play on double width, what they try to do is, against teams that are very centrally compact, for example, in those areas, they try and funnel play out through these areas by getting an extra body in those sort of wider areas. Often, teams like to occupy the lanes across the pitch in a fairly even manner, but by dropping players into these areas, they're not leaving these sort of passing lanes open, they're reducing the distance to getting the ball to these kind of players, and then these kind of players can carry the ball up and play it to their flank players. Cole Palmer obviously didn't only do that. When I talk about footedness a little bit earlier, Cole Palmer's left foot means it's easy for him to play these direct passes into this channel for Liam Delap to run onto. Equally, Enzo Fernandez, as a right-footed player, can play these vertical passes into the channel for, again, your striker running in behind. With, for example, right-foot player in this position, playing that pass becomes more difficult because it's moving away from goal rather than directly towards goal in that left-footed manner or in this right-footed manner. So if we're appreciating footedness, I think that's a sensible thing to do. Did it work for Chelsea in general? I think in the first half, they actually had a good few chances, particularly going around the block rather than going through the centre. And around the block meant, instead of, finding players in these areas. They often found Kukurea running in behind. Cole Palmer linked well with him, and some of those passes actually did make their way into these areas. Kukurea got some chances here. There was a lot of times actually where Kukurea and Cole Palmer were in these areas. They played good crosses, but there wasn't enough bodies in the box, or they didn't read the movement of Liam Delap to the best of their ability. So the timing and the movements between those players was a little bit off, but generally that's how the first half looked. One thing I'll mention about this sort of use of Cole Palmer on that side, and we'll rub out some of these lines whilst we're doing that, is Cole Palmer is obviously a really impressive player, and he's Chelsea's best player in my opinion. If you've got your best player, in my opinion, you want your best player in his best zones. And Cole Palmer is somebody who likes to play on a lot of touches. He likes to play in these areas inside right. And in those inside right areas, obviously, he can take shots, he can score goals, he can move outside, he can move inside. But he has more influence, and his best sort of goal contributing actions come from the inside right half space. Now, look, is there an argument to be made for creating a tactical plan and moving some of your best players around if that plan gets you good chances like it did in the first half? I suppose, but in general, I would always want my best players to play in their best zones, and if I can do that all across the park, then I would feel like I'm a successful manager and a successful coach in general. So look, in the same way, Di Maria shouldn't be playing in these sort of right wing back positions, and then I think, is it Bruno Lang, who's the coach of Benfica, moved him higher up into one of these positions, and then you obviously had a different player here who kind of slotted back and was that 5 at the back defender. That's an optimal way to profile your best talents, by putting them in zones that they're more favourable in. In the same way, that example is getting Di Maria in his best zones. I would love to see Cole Palmer in these areas and trying to get a game model that gets, him in those positions, because that's where he did his best work, particularly under Pochettino, and also in moments where it was a little bit more transitional. It's hard to do that in the hot weather, and I'm sure we'll see teams who are really good in the first half particularly thrive in this competition. Deep squads or a strong physical base push further through this competition. Teams who are used to those conditions, the Brazilian teams, for example, again, push further on in this competition. We'll move on from talking about the actual direct tactical setup in the first half. It was a brilliant goal from Reece James, Mr. Reece James, this man here. I think it was about there. And yeah, he caught out the Benfica keeper in a really impressive way from distance. Benfica's keeper, Trubin, he was brilliant all game until the goal he conceded, and it's unfortunate because for as good as his performance was, it's not a goal that you generally want to concede, but I think it's very smart and intelligent and also brilliant execution from Reece James to put that away. We talk so much about tactics and what formations people play in and how they're going to get the best of their opposition and blah, 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 but your best players showcasing that quality is what wins you the game. And Reece James' pure ball striking ability, his ingenuity to take that shot early, the ability to recognise that Trubin, if I'm pronouncing that correctly or incorrectly, let me know in the comments, stepped out a little bit, preempting that cross and trying to claim the ball, and finding him at that near post through a bouncing shot, which is really hard to stop in general. Look, it was brilliant from Reece James, and that kind of set Chelsea on their way. And took some of that steam out of Benfica, who were holding on a little bit throughout the game. It was really hard for them, but I thought their defensive shape was really strong and they probably could have held out for a little bit longer. I want to highlight Antonio Silva in this position here, who was really impressive as a box defender. I'm not massively familiar with the Benfica side. I would be lying if I said I was familiar with them. I saw a tweet from somebody who was, when I was praising Antonio Silva for his brilliant box defending, and he's been really stand out in that aspect of his game in this tournament so far. The comment that I got was from somebody who was really in tune and up to date with how Benfica had played this season, and they said that he hadn't played in that manner or with that level of quality throughout the season, but it was really nice to see him kind of showcase that quality in the Club World Cup. So I know he's been linked to top teams in Europe in general. On the basis of this performance, he certainly has that quality, but I can't base it off of one very small sample size of one game. He stopped Cole Palmer 1v1 a couple of times. He was really impressive in defending that box. But I just wanted to highlight him as being somebody who was really impressive in that game for Benfica. This is the morning version of me. Hopefully I've chopped and edited the video in a way that makes sense, so you understand what happened in the first 86 minutes and what my general thoughts of the game were for that part of the game. Now, this is the postponement part of my reaction and analysis. And look, Di Maria, he scores the penalty. It was brilliant to see him actually get a goal, probably in his last ever, or certainly in his last ever game for Benfica. He really deserved that. I think his penalty technique was really interesting because he kind of waits to the last moment, watches the movement of Sanchez, and he puts it in the opposite corner. It's kind of like Neymar or Jorginho in that sort of technique. The penalty itself, I would certainly disagree against that being a penalty. I know it was a handball. I think with VAR and with referees under pressure, when you have a still or a single image where you can clearly see the ball hitting a player's hand, it's hard for them to not give it. In real time, you probably wouldn't give it. The ball is coming from a direction that the player's not looking in. You can, make the argument that his silhouette's bigger than it should be, but under such a small distance, the ball hitting his hand in that sort of manner, I probably wouldn't give it. One issue I have with penalties in general is it gives you like a 70 or 80% chance of scoring a goal. Now, I think the infringement or whatever happens has to be worth giving up that chance of a 70 or 80% guarantee of a goal. Now, what I mean by that is, if you're running through on goal and you get slide tackled, that's such a bad infringement that it probably deserves the opposition getting a chance at nearly scoring a goal. If you're handballing the ball, or the ball rather hits your hand from such close distance at such a intense speed, so far away from goal, is that a bad enough thing to happen in the game to warrant the opposition getting an almost guaranteed goal in the game? I don't think so. So I think referees should be judging a little bit more subjectively on that front. I know they have, more firm and strict rule books that are subject to interpretation, but I think, does the crime match the punishment, rather, like almost go backwards in that sense, to see if a penalty should be given. And I don't think it should have been given in that case. It did make for an interesting extra time, and we'll move on to talk a little bit about that. Actually, before we get into extra time, there was a red card, and it's important to mention that because it changed the dynamics of the game. Benfica with some older players in their squad, and they look really tired. So having one less player in those weather conditions in particular made it really hard for them to cover the distances. And as we move on to extra time, it was telling to see a little bit of the difference that the game carrying on made, with Benfica obviously playing in that sort of 4-4-1 shape. At times they moved to a 4-3-2 because they had 10 men. Chelsea still had a lot of the ball, and the onus was on them to kind of break down Benfica. With that first goal that came about, I thought Nkunku was really impressive actually in his cameo, and we'll get onto him in a little bit, but the goal came about through Benfica's poor technical execution, through being really tired and their players not being able to get to certain players with enough intensity. And Chubin, for as brilliant as he was, and I think in the original video I talked him up a lot, in that first 45 minutes he was massively impressive. He made this huge save against Cucurella, the way he kind of proactively came to the, not exactly towards Cucurella entirely, but halfway, held his position, spread his body in a really tall way. Yeah, he was really impressive. He made some brilliant saves as well in that first 45. And throughout the game, he was generally impressive until you can see that goal to Reece James. There was some criticism I had about Chubin's performance, namely his passing. And yeah, he played some loose passes, and Benfica in general played a lot, weaker in their build-up and in trying to get out of play. There was actually one passage of play after one of the goals where Benfica have the kickoff, they pass it to one of their centre-backs, and the centre-back tries to pass to the teammate and he just kicks out of play. And that was kind of the perfect example to illustrate what happened to Benfica in extra time. If we're focusing on the goal directly, obviously Benfica turn it over, and it's a brilliant play in general from Cole Palmer, playing more vertically, and Caicedo having the engine, having the physical base, but also that technical quality paired with it to keep going so late into the game, having played such a strenuous role throughout that match. And obviously he takes the shot, Chubin makes a good save, but yeah, Nkunku's there to follow up. And Nkunku's cameo was really impressive to me. He was really tenacious, hardworking. I've spoken about him being a really strong player. He was obviously linked to United recently, and Chelsea fans were telling me he was quite lazy and he didn't really work hard. But I think this performance dispels that myth. If you can get him confident and playing at his best, he's somebody who works really hard for the team. He follows in that chance. Otamendi actually makes a brilliant block, and it's the cleverness from Nkunku to then chip it over him or play that kind of higher shot in such a short amount of time, realising that that's what he needs to do after the block shot from Otamendi to then get the goal. And that obviously set Chelsea on their way. Benfica, with one goal to chase, tried to come out a little bit more, and they tried to press Chelsea to win the ball a little bit higher up. They played in this 4-4-1 shape Benfica, and it was a very reactive press. Wherever the ball went, the nearest player tried to get out. It wasn't a coordinated press across the pitch, and in trying to do so, obviously they were slower to get out. They didn't have the energy to really do that, and Chelsea could kind of pick them apart. Chelsea obviously sat in at that point and then played on their strengths, which is, in my opinion, that transitional quality to attack a little bit more directly. And the second goal, again, similar in Benfica losing the ball in the middle of the park, lacking that sort of energy, that technical security and consistency. And then, Chelsea attack more vertically again. And put that chance away. Neto's been on brilliant form. The composure to put that chance away is really impressive, and he's been one of the standout players for me, I think, in this Club World Cup, particularly with that end product. You've moved Cole Palmer away from that right-hand side. You've probably minimised his quality a little bit for perhaps the greater good of the team. I do think the team would probably play better if Cole Palmer's platformed in the best possible way, but the left side of Chelsea has tended to be weak in recent months. Cole Palmer obviously raises the level of the left-hand side, even though he's performing a little bit worse than perhaps he could, and Neto's kind of shoulders some of that responsibility on that better right-hand side with his goal output and being more of a traditional outlet. In the same way I think about Barcelona, for example, you've got Lamine as that creator and Rafinha as that runner on the other side. You've kind of got a similar-ish dynamic with Cole Palmer in this game as the more creative player on that left-hand side, and the outlet runner, scorer kind of profile in Neto on the right-hand side. And then obviously the third goal is, again, Nkunku's involvement. The ball goes long. Benfica aren't back because they're pushing and trying to chase the game. And then Nkunku receiving the ball, and he releases Dewsbury-Hall, who again puts the ball away in that transitional fashion. So look, it's hard to make big sweeping statements from just that extra time performance. I think the game was a lot closer than the scoreline suggests. And after the red card, you can't really, expect Benfica to put up a real fight, because in those conditions, after so many minutes, after the break in play, it's a really hard and bizarre situation to find yourself in. One thing I do want to mention before I wrap up this video, Maresca's response and his celebration following that goal. I think it was nice actually that he celebrated with Nkunku the way that they ran to each other, because there's been talks that he's not platforming him properly, or has not utilised him, or whether or not they kind of have a really good or strained relationship. But the way that they celebrated was brilliant to see. People always talk about the Club World Cup being perhaps one tournament too many, and people aren't buying into it. But I think what I've seen in this tournament is coaches and players really buying into this. And players and coaches are at the highest level because they're incredibly competitive. After what felt like an injustice of that handball being given against them, after the annoyance of waiting so many, not even minutes, a couple of hours for the game to restart, and then scoring a goal. You can see how much it meant to Maresca to progress to win. He said, I've never seen him celebrate with that much intensity and that much passion. So, look, the tournament obviously means things to these players. Chelsea are, they made a deep run in this competition. The prize money that they've already won from progressing this far is, eye-watering numbers for any club, never mind a club as rich as Chelsea, who, they don't necessarily need the money, but to balance the books, it's always a favourable thing, isn't it? But I just thought it was really nice to see him really passionate and really expressive in a game in this tournament, because it gives credence to that tournament a little bit more.